Fiowitz for a presentation on the 2024 results of operations. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Council Chair. Good afternoon, council members. Walter Parfiowitz from the Office of Budget Management, presenting on the results of operations, 2024 results of operations. I trust everyone has a copy of the report and the accompanying PowerPoint. The presentation or the PowerPoint's a precise summary of the full report, but just to help you follow along, I have on the actual PowerPoint slide referenced in the lower left-hand corner the page number, the relevant page number in the report, depending on which one you want to follow along with. So before we dive into the results of operations, Finance Chair Turner has requested a brief overview of the budget and financial reporting requirements that are established by county code. This will provide some context and understanding of what to expect moving forward. County Financial Policies, Chapter 701. This chapter outlines the guiding principles for the county's financial operations. Section 701.01 requires a 2-year budget in every odd number year with updates in the even number years. Section 701.03 requires an annual information statement, provides some key financial information to investors, rating agencies, and the public. Section 701.07 requires an annual report on prior year's results, along with some quarterly and financial reports, and additionally an outstanding loans report. I did issue that earlier this year to all of you. Section 701.08 governs the fiscal agenda process for modifying appropriations, transferring funds, and managing cash transfers. So by adhering to these requirements, I believe we uphold our integrity, demonstrate fiscal responsibility, and ensure transparency in our financial operations, and strengthen our ability to our taxpayers. I guess at this point, we'll just transition right into the report. I want to just start out with some highlights. I know there's a lot listed here, but really what I want to go over is just those that are specific to the fourth quarter. The majority have already been reviewed at the first, second, and third quarter presentations. So in fourth quarter, we issued $50 million in bonds for the Rock Hall. We refunded $131.6 million in bonds related to the Hilton Hotel, county's Hilton Hotel, saving about $4.5 million. The 2025 budget update was approved, but it did reflect deficits in both the general fund and the HHS levy funds. $14.5 million of bond anticipation notes were authorized for Gateway. And then finally, at year end, we reduced $225 million in excess appropriations to ensure that we complied with our audit requirements.
Director, 1 second.
Yes.
Let the record reflect that Councilman Pernell Jones is with us. Are there any questions about 2024 highlights? Okay, let's proceed.
Okay, so just before we start, I'd just like to briefly outline the structure of the presentation. We'll begin by addressing the two operating funds, the general fund and the HHS levy fund. Then we'll do an all funds overview. We'll take a look at staffing levels. We'll review some capital projects. We'll take a look at outstanding debt. And then we'll discuss appropriation reductions. In the end, I'll provide some detail. For each operating fund, we'll examine whether we have an operating surplus or a deficit. We'll compare budget amounts to actual figures for revenues, expenditures, subsidies, and then we'll evaluate how the operating surplus or the deficit impacts our cash balance and our reserve requirements. So we'll start with the general fund. The general fund closed 2024 with an operating deficit of $92.4 million. This figure is derived by comparing actual revenues of $597.6 million to actual expenditures of $690 million, that first column there. Second column includes the ARPA expenditures. So excluding ARPA expenditures, of $65.5 million. The deficit narrowed to $26.9 million in the third column. So the next several slides, we're going to do a budget to actual comparison. We're going to begin with general fund revenue. Actual revenue ended at $597.6 million, $2.6 million or 0.4% below budget. Two major variances. One was in interest earnings. We finished at $33 million, exceeding budget by $17.3 million. It's 110.8%. Thanks to strong returns in both the investment portfolio and the daily cash balances, earning approximately 5% via the Star Ohio rating. Sales taxes concluded at $323.3 million, falling short of budget by $14.2 million or 4.2%. We experienced minimal growth, only $3.1 million or 1% over 2023's actuals, all impacted by both inflation and consumer spending. General fund expenditures are categorized into personnel services, other expenditures, and subsidies to other funds. Total expenditures, $690 million, $56.3 million or 7.5% under budget. Personnel services, $364, $8.4 million or 2.3% under budget. Other expenditures, $245.4 million, $49.8 million or 16.9% under the budget. And then subsidies to other funds, $80.7 million. Small $1.9 million variance, 2.4%. Second box, we have ARPA expenditures, $65.5, what we referenced earlier. They're included in other expenses in the top box. Excluding ARPA, the general fund expenditures totaled $624.6 million or $23.8 million, 3.7% under the budget.
Madam Chair,
Councilman Miller?
what were the primary drivers for the subsidies exceeding the budget by about $2 million?
Through the chair to Councilman Miller, one of the items, well, we'll go over it in another slide coming up, but I just want to say, convention center debt, we made an advance payment on the debt that eventually came back to us and reduced rent to the CCC FDC, so it appears as a budget variance, but it's in the grand scheme of things, it is not. Secondary item was the transfer to the Veteran Services Fund of prior year's surplus in the general fund. They're not, while they're routine items, they're just not budgeted items.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So this slide goes over the general fund expenditures and the surpluses by department. What I'm trying to show here, who are the major drivers. So we had a $58.2 million surplus in the general fund expenditures. The majority of them come from these three areas. The county executive departments had $46.3 million in surplus, and they include economic development, the fiscal office, IT law, medical examiner, and the sheriff's office. Elected officials had an $8.4 million surplus. We had contributions from, as you can see, Common Pleas Court, Juvenile, and Prosecutor's Office. And then boards and commissions, $3.5 million. The largest contributor there was from the Board of Elections. Surpluses were largely due to vacancies, underspending, and professional and contractual services. Pages 9 through 11 actually in the report provide details. And on page 39, there is a chart that provides detail on all of the departments and what their actual surpluses were or deficits. In some cases, there were some small deficits.
Madam Chair,
President Miller?
going back to the previous slide,
Yes.
what accounts for the $2,241,000 underspend in economic development.
Councilman Miller, that I believe is the transfer of the housing department to its own, and that's just the remnant budget that was not reduced until the end of the year.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
This chart is on the general fund subsidies that we just talked about. The first one, we had an $80.7 million spend on surpluses. We exceeded the budget by 1.9. This slide just demonstrates the larger variances or the major variances. There were two. One was the convention center debt, which we paid as a subsidy at the beginning of the year and took it back in rent from the CCC FDC, so it's a complete offset. While the subsidy showed a variance, the same variance showed up in the fiscal office departmental budget for the offset. Secondarily, it's the transfer. It's the routine transfer, moving the unspent portion of 2023's Veteran Services budget to the Veteran Services Fund. Moving on to the cash balance. So this slide outlines the ending cash balance, both with and without our ARPA. Beginning cash, $274.9 million. As you saw previously, operating revenue of $597.6 and operating expenditures of $609.4. Subsidies to other funds, $80.6, leaving an ending cash balance in the general fund of $182,500,000. This ending cash balance, $35.2 million above the cash reserve requirement of $147.2 million, and we are in compliance. Now, if I break it down a little further, with the ARPA cash that remains, the 32.6, this is the total amount of ARPA that still remains in the general fund. If you back that number out of the $82.5 million, we end at $149.9 million, just $2.7 million above the cash reserve requirement. Questions about the cash?
President Miller.
What's your estimate on how much of the remaining $32.6 million in ARPA money will be spent in 2025?
Through the chair to Councilman Miller, I have the entire 32.6 in our projection. I do it religiously. I always showed the remaining balance to be spent. There's the ARPA fund in itself for projects has roughly $20 million left in it, and the Justice Center Capital Projects Fund portion has roughly $12 million in it. So it's a total of $32 million.
Okay, thank you.
Questions about the general fund before we move on to the Health and Human Services levy funds? Health and Human Services levy is a little less detailed than the general fund, but we should be able to get through this fairly quickly. So for 2024, the Health and Human Services levy fund ended with an operating surplus, as you can see, is just $1.5 million. Revenue, $286.2 million, and expenditures and subsidies of $284.7 million. Just two categories of revenue in the Health and Human Services levy. $286.2 million. We exceeded budget by $5.1 million, or just 1.8%. Two categories, as you can see up there, we have intergovernmental revenue. That's basically the homestead rollback, $16.2 million, slightly above the budget of $16.1. Property taxes, $270 million, which is $4.9 million, or 1.9% over the budget of $265.
Director,
Yes.
can you give a little further clarification about what you mean when you say it's part of the homestead rollback?
Homestead is the money that comes back to us from the state each year for the homestead exemption on property taxes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. This slide summarizes the Health and Human Services levy expenditures and subsidies to the other funds. Majority of what you'll see here is subsidies to the Adams Board, to the Metro Health Hospital, and then subsidies to our Department of Health and Human Services, all the divisions. There's roughly 8 divisions of Health and Human Services. Everyone is subsidized through this process. Here's some detail on the larger variances. The departments and subsidies contributing to just the $800,000 surplus. Just so that everyone's aware of subsidies, the definition, budgeted HHS levy appropriations that are transferred to cover department expenses that exceed federal and state funding that they receive, or potentially other funds as well as state and federal. But basically, it's the backstop. We fill the gap with HHS levy dollars. The major contributors here, there are surpluses here. There's also deficits. Juvenile court had a $4.5 million surplus. It's primarily vacancies and probation staff. HHS admin had a $4.2 million deficit driven by the transfer of some workforce development staff when they transferred to not-for-profit status, spending on the CCMEP program, and also the 1801 lease for the HHS departments. Job and Family Services had a $4 million deficit, primarily due to increased overtime costs, in hopes of reducing those call center wait times. They also had some retroactive bargaining unit pay adjustments in these numbers. Child Support had a $2.7 million surplus. This was savings from vacancies, but the biggest item was a delay in retroactive pay adjustments for the bargaining unit staff. There was also some underspending in their cooperative agreements with the courts. Children's Services had a $2.3 million deficit, most from additional worker hiring and then higher per diem rates for kids in county custody. Early Childhood had a $800,000 surplus, primarily late invoices and reduced UPK enrollment is what was reported. Family and Children First Council had a $600,000 surplus, primarily underspending in contracts. Homeless Services had a $1.6 million surplus attributable to the timing of contracted provider invoices and then some chargebacks as well. Reentry had a small $800,000 surplus, not really for reentry, it's a small budget, so an $800,000 surplus is fairly large, but primarily spending in client service contracts. There is a complete list of all of the variances from each department on page 42 of the report if you want to have a look for yourselves. So the ending cash balance in the Health and Human Services levy fund, we started with 39.6 at the beginning of the year. As you saw, 286.2 million in revenue came in. Expenditures and subsidies totaled $284.7 million. We ended the year at 41.1 million. So we exceeded the cash reserve requirement of 27.3 million by $13.7 million, and we are in compliance with county code.
Director, the page 42 that you're referencing is in this document here?
Yes,
Thank you.
it's the document that's labeled Health and Human Services levy subsidies. It is page 42.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Jones?
Could you just go back and tell me again why the Office of Reentry came in under about 600,000?
It was $800,000, Councilman Jones, yes. 800 driven by underspending in client service contracts. Everything that reentry does is client service driven. They only have, I believe the number may be as high as 10 staff, but all their services are contracted out. They don't provide any direct services in reentry. So it could be, a lot of it could be the timing of invoices coming in. We wouldn't pay this year. We may have to pick up out of next year's budget, out of this 2025's budget.
I'm sorry,
Welcome.
Director. Can you give another explanation for the surplus in the office, in homeless?
Homeless? Of course, of course. It's a $1.6 million surplus. It's all attributable to the timing of contracted provider invoices and chargebacks. So we may have another timing issue here as well. Because homeless services, much like reentry, they don't provide a direct service to the homeless. It's all contracted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions about the levy fund? So just to go over the all funds, when I say all funds, it includes everything that the county, every fund the county has, the general fund, all the special revenue funds, the debt service fund, capital funds, enterprise funds, internal service fund, it's everything combined. So Cuyahoga is a county, total revenue of $1.788 billion, exceeding the budget by $4.8 million, just 0.3%. Total expenditures this year, $1.934 billion, coming in $231 million under budget, or 10.7%. So this slide just highlights the major funds that impacted the revenue, and they're basically the funds that you saw earlier, the general fund revenue and also the HHS levy revenue. But $4.8 million was the surplus. As you saw, we had a larger variance in all funds expenditures, and these are actually the funds or the departments that make up that variance. We went over the general fund and the levy. General fund had a $56.3 million variance, or a surplus. Health and Human Services had just an $800,000 surplus, but let's get a little bit more into the special revenues. So the fiscal office had a $30.4 million surplus. You see, it's the first three lines there. The first line was $13 million, basically due to county hotel debt service and the Flats East Bank guarantee. We as a county are required to budget for these two items, even though we don't anticipate ever paying them. So we budget for the county hotel debt service that comes out of the county hotel operating account, and the Flats East Bank guarantee, roughly $1.1 million that we budget each year that we don't ever anticipate to pay. The real estate assessment fund had about $1 million surplus, and we had a $16.4 million surplus in excise tax allocated to the Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. This too, while we pay all this money out and it flows through us, we have to budget 100% for it, and it really remains on our books because they receive the excise taxes direct. Health and Human Services, $17.2 million surplus. A lot of it's attributable to personnel services, contracts, client services, and grants, many of which will be carried over into 2025 and 26. Housing had a $49.2 million surplus, primarily in HUD grants that will be also carried into future years. Public Works, Road and Bridge Funds, $22.3 million surplus. This is a routine surplus. You know, we always have $20 million plus surpluses. It's all due to what we budget and then the timing of when projects are completed and the final invoices are paid. Public Works Sanitary, $10.1 million surplus. Again, what's reported is delayed reimbursements from municipalities, contingencies, and emergency repairs. Juvenile Court had an $8 million surplus, and this is all from the reclaim grants that carry forward into 2026, all the way through 2026 and even 2027. The Adams Board had an $8.9 million surplus, $600,000 in personnel, $1.3 million in contracts, and then $7.1 million in client service contracts. And the workforce development variance of $6.6 million is due to the workforce development board moving to not-for-profit status effective July 1, 2024. So this basically was the variance, what was remaining in their budget that they never spent.
President Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you tell us what the year-end balance was for the Adams Board?
Through the chair to Councilman Miller, I believe the balance was roughly $20 million, maybe $22 million. I'll get you the exact number.
Okay, so it's still substantial, but it's come down quite a bit from where it was in the last couple of years.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So the next slide outlines the ending cash balance on an all funds basis. So this is all in for the entire county. We started the year with 1.068 billion in cash. We brought in revenue of 1.788 billion. Expenditures totaled 1.934, as you saw earlier. We ended the year with $922 million of cash on the books in Cuyahoga County.
Director,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about, I'm looking in this document and it says there's no statutory requirement related to the cash balance on all funds basis. What is that?
Yes, Councilwoman Turner, there is no statutory requirement when it comes to what a reserve balance is on an all funds basis. We have ordinances in place for the general fund and the Health and Human Services levy fund, but those are the only two funds where we have required reserve balances.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So at this point, I'd like to move over and take a look at some staffing levels. So the graph, county's payroll increased by 139 employees from 7,186 in 2023 to 7,325 in 2024. That's a simple graph. Here's a little more detail. So this slide details the departments that had the significant growth. Clerk of Court was 8. Fiscal Office actually lost 23. Department of Health and Human Services increased by 74. And in that 74 were 20 social workers added, 38 caseworkers added, but child support lost 14 support officers. Information technology added 7. Medical examiner added 9. Public Works added 21. The sheriff added 8. 4 were corrections officers, 4 were deputies. The prosecutor added 21. Common Pleas Court added 7. Juvenile Court added 28, 18 of which were detention officers. Board of Developmental Disabilities added 17. Public Defender added 8. And then Workforce Development, 11. There is a complete list on page 45 of the report if you want to take a look at all the departments and whether they increased or decreased between 2023 and 24. It's on page 45.
Councilman Hauser?
Director, I'm looking on page 44, and it looks like the executive staff is, looks like they're over budget, maybe $2 million, which is similar to on line 8 from the budget cut. It's about $2 million that we're looking to reduce for the general fund staff. Have we taken a look at reducing the amount of our executive staff?
Councilman Hauser, I don't believe we've reviewed the staffing level to reduce it, but I just want to point out on page 44, that's an all funds report. Mm-hmm. And that deficit there is not in the county executive's general fund where all the executive staff are. That deficit is due to the opioid fund and what was budgeted versus what was spent.
And is this labeled executive?
Yeah, it's labeled executive. The opioid fund has an EX prefix on it, so that's what materialized into a small deficit.
Okay, thank you for that clarity.
You're welcome. Next, I just like to go over capital projects quickly. So we had $2.6 million deficit in capital project spending. And this slide details the three departments where we charge the capital projects to. So information services had a small $135,000 surplus. Juvenile court had a $1.1 million deficit, and then public works had a $1.6 million deficit. These numbers are a little bit deceiving because juvenile court and public works, while they show up as deficits, they're actually using budgeted dollars from prior years, which we don't report on. We only report on annual budgets and annual spending. So these were dollars that were carried over from previous years, just that we didn't budget for them in our budget. They were covered by a cash balance. So the juvenile court, the only project that they have is their security system. And then public works, I'd have to delve a little more or deeper into that. But there is a $1.6 million deficit between what's budgeted and what was spent, not necessarily the cash that they have available. We have a cash balance in our capital project fund that covers all of these of roughly $28 million, even after all these expenses were paid. Questions about capital projects? There are some reports as well. If you go to the back of the report, I should have referenced them. There are the final couple of pages of the report, 46, 47, and 48 detail all the capital projects.
Thank you. President Miller?
Thank you. The balance that you mentioned in the capital projects fund, the 28 million, does that fund include the IT capital projects, or is that considered separately?
Through the chair to Councilman Miller, that is included.
Okay, thank you.
So at this point, I'd like to just go over the outstanding debt very quickly, if I could. Very simple chart. So as of January 1st, 2025, the county has $1.187 billion in outstanding debt. So this chart details all the debt by the category, how many issuances there are, and what the dollar value is. So let me just go over each one and just go over what's maturing and when. So the general obligation debt, currently we have 5 issues totaling $272 million. The 2019B major capital for Gateway bonds mature in December of 2027, so coming up quickly. Sales tax revenue debt, there are 8 issues totaling $452 million. The non-tax revenue debt, 10 issues totaling $255 million. In that category, we have 5 issues that are maturing in the next several years. We have the Western Reserve debt maturing in December of 2026. We have the Medical Mart maturing in December of 2027. We have commercial redevelopment maturing in June of 2030. The brownfields mature in June of 2030, and then Shaker Square matures in December of 2030. So we do have some maturing debt that should be falling off of our debt table soon. We have county hotel certificates of participation. These are basically bonds we issued for the county hotel, $187 million. And then we have 1 issue of taxable revenue debt totaling $19.7 million. That is on the Flats East Bank. All debt is detailed on pages 26 to 37 of the report.
Madam Chair.
President Miller?
On the hotel certificates and on the taxable revenue debt, what are the maturity dates on those?
Those I would have to, let me look those up, Councilman Miller. Let me get back to you on those.
Okay.
Because especially the county hotel debt, we pay through 2027, and then the hotel operating account picks up the debt. Those actually fall off when 2028 starts, right at the beginning of the new quarter percent.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Just one more slide. the reduction of excess appropriation. December 2024, council authorized me to reduce excess appropriations at the end of the year. By the close of 2024, we reduced $225.3 million in excess appropriations. I issued a report, I believe in January, to all of you that detail the reductions. We do it basically for compliance with auditing standards and to confirm appropriations do not exceed revenues. You can see the top box before reductions where the year was closing. You see that appropriations exceeded revenue. After our appropriation reductions in the middle box, you see the result. We were in compliance, so our actual revenue exceeded our appropriations that remained on the books. Are there questions? I mean, that was my last slide, and I know I've talked about a lot of things, a lot of topics, went over a lot of areas, and I know a lot of the members of council are new to this, so any other questions, I'll do my best to answer, but feel free to call or email with others as you read through the reports or review the reports.
Excellent report.
Well,
No
thank you very
questions.
much. I appreciate that.
I know it was great to have this information in advance, so appreciate that as well. All right, going once, twice. All right, thank you, Director.
You're very welcome.
President Miller, any final thoughts?
I presume we're also going to hear about the stabilization plan.
Yes.
That's next.
Chief Janice is here.
Okay, fine. Just a comment that you covered a wide range. You covered the items in the county code. You covered all the different funds. You covered personnel levels. You covered the debt obligations. You covered the capital side. So it was comprehensive, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilman Miller. I appreciate it as well.
Thank you for those comments, President Miller. Okay, at this time, we'll hear from Chief Eric Janice about the General Fund Budget Stabilization Plan.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair, members of the committee. Eric Janice, Chief of Staff. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of you today. I'll be brief, provide a brief overview. I have with me Katie Gallagher, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations and Innovation, and Director Perfiowicz to answer any detailed questions you may have. But in recognition that when we passed a budget at the end of 2024 for calendar year 2025, the budget was out of balance by about $25 million. And while I recognize we had adequate cash reserves to cover that and still be in compliance with the county's stated cash reserve policy, we needed to start to think about bringing this budget back into balance. Furthermore, additional external factors, which I outlined in my memo to all directors on March 21st, indicated an additional sense of urgency as it relates to reducing this $25 million deficit. And they include approved federal grants and funding streams being delayed or canceled, or the uncertainty surrounding them as it relates to projects that are important to the administration, macroeconomic conditions which suggest a slowdown in the overall economy, and sales tax receipts that have slowed at the beginning of the year relative to projections and relative to previous year's growth. So we challenged the team to come up with $25 million in cuts. Chief Gallagher and the budget and fiscal team met with each and every director that has general fund component to their agency to look for and secure additional cuts and identify one-time funding savings that we could implement to reduce the deficit. The director and the deputy chief identified $9.6 million in one-time savings. But as we know, that was not enough and is not enough to bring the budget into balance. So I outlined for the directors a couple of measures that we are taking, that were taken effective immediately upon completion of this memo. One, we are reducing hiring costs by requiring an extra level of approval by either Chief Gallagher or myself for any hires to replace vacancies. There are a couple of limited exceptions, but I did not want to implement a blanket hiring freeze. Wanted to be more strategic than that. As we know, some positions are mission critical and must be filled. Others can be filled or delayed in their filling over time. Secondly, we are asking our general fund agencies to cut a modest amount of overtime. That includes overtime for the sheriff's office to the tune of about $1.3 million and an additional $200,000 cut by the Department of Public Works. Third, identifying non-personnel cuts to general fund spending across all of our agencies. We've identified $12.1 million in cuts that can be made if we base appropriations on 2024 expenditures. In other words, there have been agencies that have previously been budgeted but not spent their entire amount. And so in setting a target, again, rather than a blanket target, we set individual targets for each general fund agency commensurate with the money that went unspent in 2024. With those three major categories and a couple of additional categories, such as reducing costs related to technology, specifically cell phone usage. We have many, many employees that have county cell phones that go underused or unused, and tighter scrutiny on travel related to the general fund, which we had previously discussed. Together, those items totaled $25.8 million in savings, bringing the budget roughly into balance. We are, of course, monitoring the budget situation as we go throughout 2025. Some of the external factors that I mentioned remain. We want to pay attention to sales tax growth over the rest of the year. If you recall, we budgeted a conservative 2.5% increase in sales tax growth. Historically, this county has budgeted for a 4% increase, but we aren't yet seeing that 2.5% growth. We know that there are several legal settlements that we may be facing in the future as a county, and of course, the aforementioned loss in federal dollars for various programs and projects. I have with me Chief Gallagher and Director Parfialowicz. I'm also happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions? Of course, President Miller.
So, to Director Parfialowicz, please. I know you don't have anything close to official numbers because today is the last day of the first quarter, but my question is, I know that you've been working on this budget stuff for a number of weeks now, and it's been working through the system, and my question is whether you have evidence that some restraint in expenditure level has already been achieved in the first quarter, or do you think that that was presented here is is totally forward-looking and that hopefully we're going to start to see progress starting in the second quarter.
Through the chair to Council Miller, I believe we've seen some of both. I believe
Okay.
that the first quarter is really light on expenses, so it may be artificial. But we are planning these types of adjustments now for the remainder of the year.
Okay. That'll do it for now.
Okay. Couple of questions. Is there a projected dollar amount regarding the financial settlements that are outstanding?
I don't believe we have anything solid at this point in time. No, we had some estimates that were prepared last year sometime, I believe was it the prosecutor's office? Lambert, I think, prepared something, but a lot of the categories were categories that were unable to be projected.
Okay.
And I would also add, Madam Chair, not certain that those costs will be incurred this year.
Fair, yes.
Okay. 26, 27? Not sure. Okay. Let's talk bonds. With the county considering bonds for the new jail or even the stadium, have we heard any feedback or concerns from bond agencies about these new potential issuances?
We were just rated by both S&P and Moody's just recently, and our actual rating, I believe it was by Moody's, went up slightly. I mean, we discuss, what we have coming in the future at every one of our rating sessions. So far, there's been no real concern. But I think as we get closer to actually getting to the GMP and eventually starting the process of issuing the bonds and where we are financially in the way of our cash reserve requirements in both the general fund and the levy, it'll become a little more involved.
Okay.
Chair, what is our rating?
Councilman?
Through the chair to Councilman Jones, I believe we are AA+ and AA between both, but I can confirm both of them to you. I don't have them off the top of my head. We have not dropped at all in any type of credit rating. In fact, I believe it was Moody's who gave us a higher grade based on the fact that when our sales taxes are collected by the state, the sales taxes go to our trustee, which is Huntington Bank. Huntington Bank withholds our sales tax debt service each month and then forwards the difference to us, which is what is deposited into the general fund. Just the mere fact that we have that third-party trustee intervening and collecting our sales tax on our behalf and withholding the sales tax debt service, the credit ratings like the fact that it's secured.
Okay. Question about the previous 20 million investments that $20 million investments that we made in major capital repairs to our sports facilities, overseen by Gateway last year. Do you know if there are any expected repairs or expenses this year?
We're not aware of anything more than what we just issued. We don't have anything new.
Okay. That's good to hear.
And I may add, Madam Chair, I do not expect that request would be coming anytime in 2025, even if there is one. We had that conversation with the Gateway clubs when we brought this to you back in December.
That's great news. Okay, my last question. I'll turn it back over to my colleagues. Okay, do we have an actual plan to reduce sheriff overtime when they aren't fully funded for the 2024 actuals?
I'll ask Chief Gallagher to join me up here if she would, but yes, we do. Madam Chair, we've been talking with the sheriff about how he schedules for corrections officers. working with the Human Resources Department to make sure that we have a better system and process by which we are processing those employees that are no longer with us, and setting new policies as it relates to scheduling, so that we can reduce overtime. Katie, I'll let you speak a little bit more about it.
Katie Gallagher, Executive Office. Good afternoon. So since moving HR back underneath central HR, Sarah Nemistel and her team have worked quite a bit, as well as the Innovation Performance Group, to update the attendance policies for the corrections officer. They've also worked with the union. So this is starting to roll out. We should see some major reductions coming in June, hopefully. It will allow the corrections officers who are not showing up to work to get off our payroll quicker. And it's been a good collaboration with all the partners. So we're hoping so on that end. We are constantly looking at ways to manage our CBAs as far as this goes. So we will continue to do that. We will see the corrections officer CBA towards the end of the year, so we won't really see a major, but there is built-in overtime in some of these CBAs, and taking a look at those to see if we can see any reductions. And then IT has been critical in helping the Sheriff's Department use the system to start tracking overtime. So we're moving forward with that, where a policy will need to come out from the sheriff pretty soon, which I've heard is already completed, but he just needs to implement it, where all of the Sheriff's Department employees will have to mark why they are completing the overtime and who's approving that overtime. That alone will help us start to target particular factors that are causing this, or particular clusters that are causing this, or if it is a supervisor or any particular employee.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Will this require any changes through the collective bargaining agreement with the COs?
The last one I mentioned, no, that is a management right.
So what would require a change?
Just a policy from the
Just the
sheriff.
policy from the sheriff, okay. Questions? Councilman Hauser? And then Miller?
Just a clarification, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there are elements of of the collective bargaining agreements, particularly relating to the corrections officers, where there is overtime that's embedded into the agreement.
Correct.
But this collective bargaining agreement doesn't end until the end of this calendar year. So we're hoping to improve the collective bargaining agreement and give us more management flexibility, but that would not provide us any benefit until 2026. The changes that you just described that you're going through are things that you have management flexibility according to the current language, and that you are able to implement immediately. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I just have a couple clarifying questions about the budget as a whole. I do appreciate the work you guys are doing to correct our county budget. I will speak for myself. We are in agreement as far as the overtime as well as the cell phone. I was wondering, can we get a breakdown of this $12.1 million in other executive agency cuts for the council as a whole? I was wondering, is any essential services at risk of being cut through these cuts? And then just to clarify, I know we're not doing a hiring freeze. Chief, did you say that you and Chief Gallagher will be the two people that will solely determine if we do any new hiring around the county as a whole? Just for clarification.
Sure. So it's just applicable to the general fund. And yes, I will get those PRFs, personal requisition forms from HR, and I will review them with the Chief of Staff weekly. They have updated the personal requisition forms to make it easier for review, to kind of go through those critical elements to make it easier for decision, so we're not holding it up. But yes, it will have to go to the 8th floor, just on general fund positions, excluding corrections officers and PSOs.
Understood. And And so is it just you and Chief Janice, or is it like a third person, if it's like a tie, or what have you,
It's just the two of us, council member.
okay, okay. Okay, I don't know who's gonna do the tiebreaker. Last question, is there any like mid-year assessment that you guys have in place to see if these cuts are working? Are we gonna build anything to make sure that we're not doing blind cuts, that this is actually helping, or are these just so essential that this is our starting point and we will look for more things in the future?
So this is definitely our starting point. We are looking at other things. We will continue to present those as we are, but we're diving into them. We're trying to be a little bit more strategic. We will provide you the list of other expenditures, but when Director Papiawicz did send that out, he did receive multiple answers from the departments. So if there was any kind of feedback back and forth, he has been bringing that back up. We meet every other Friday to talk about the budget, and we will continue to, update and look and see if we're making progress, but also, are there any other things that we could be doing on the personnel side or the other expenditure side that we might be missing?
Thank you.
I just got to make a comment that I know of a very large governmental agency that just came in recklessly firing people to reduce the size of government without thinking about what the impacts would have to be, and in some cases having then to backtrack and try to get those people back on staff. And so I just have to say that I'm happy that the administration is pursuing what seems to be both a strong and aggressive, but also very methodical approach to dealing with the budget shortfall, and I think that's how government should operate. We're being proactive. We're allowing enough time over the course of these actions for these things to work, and it doesn't have to be disruptive to the flow of governmental services. Thank you.
Councilman Gallagher?
Thank you. Yeah, this didn't fall out of the sky. This has been sitting on the table since budget hearings, so it would had to been dealt with eventually, and it was as much our fault as yours that we allowed it to pass, and it should never happen in the future. I mean, it's unforgivable, quite honestly. The only concern I have on your cuts here is the $500,000 Veteran Services Fund. If we have a sacred cow in Cuyahoga County, it should be our veterans. Why would we propose to remove $500K from Veteran Services, which are specifically for veteran services? And I believe programming.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
President Miller?
I would like to provide some background on that. We're talking about the money that was left over from the Veteran Service Commission from last year, and it was a very large leftover. It was something like $2 million from the year before last and last year, and what we've done historically is that we've used this money to support various organizations that provide veteran services, and the money that we have available is more than what we typically provide to these organizations by a considerable amount. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of this veteran services money and use it to help pay for the build out of the new Veteran Services Commission facility, which we were planning to do anyway, but it was going to be spent out of the general fund. And instead of that, that money being spent out of the general fund, a part of it's going to be spent from this leftover Veteran Service Commission money, which frees up that amount of money in the general fund. But the answer is none of these money is being taken away from veteran services. It's just that a portion of it is being used to fund the veteran services facility so that they have the facility to continue to provide the services.
That I understand, and I understand why it should be general fund. And I do understand that they usually have a hefty balance at the end of each year. And I, along with Councilman Schron at the time and Councilwoman Simon, Simon and I actually have asked for dogs, for service dogs for veterans. And to this day, I've received 0 dogs. And anytime you're taking money from the veterans services as far as programming, I think that's a very dangerous precedent to put it into building out their offices, which were troublesome, I know, for a while there on some of the things that they were requesting. So I think this is dangerous waters to be treading, especially when we have veterans out there that could use these dogs. And I know the dogs are expensive, which is why I think we should be using these dollars to provide dogs for these veterans that are in need of them. Yes, we all see them all over the county when we're out. And every time I talk to a veteran that has a dog, it's been a life-changing experience to the point where it saves their lives. And if we're in a position to do that, I think we should start pursuing that a little bit more. I understand the need to cut, but I don't understand the need to cut anything from the veterans.
Madam Chair, to my colleagues, even if we do what we're proposing, we still have substantial revenues to distribute. So please provide me more information about providing the dogs and how it would be done and who would administer it and what it would cost, and it certainly can be seriously considered. We have capacity.
And again, I understand the need to cuts. I understand the build-out was expensive and somewhat at times controversial. But again, I think we just should very carefully wade into these waters.
Madam Chair, if I may, Councilmember Gallagher, to your first point, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to the council president and council staff as we had conversations about what we were facing and the steps we were looking to take. That was a discussion point that was put on the table. We appreciate the creativity as it relates to all opportunities and the spirit in which everybody was working together to fill the budget hole. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Councilman.
Thank you, and thank you for the clarification on the veterans. I'm talking Council President Miller at this time, and Mr. Gallagher, I appreciate your passion for our veterans. I do have, my son's served 18 years in the U.S. Army. My district, especially Parma, I kind of joke, sometimes you can't throw a rock without hitting a veteran. They're all over. Done a lot for our country. We obviously should return that favor for them. I do want to clarify, I think Councilman Miller brought it up, but I want to make sure with the sheriff's overtime, with the proposed cuts in overtime or reductions in overtime, do not go beyond anything that's laid out in the collective bargaining agreement. Is that what you said?
No.
They do not, okay. And you, as you go through these cuts, you think it's all procedural and you do not believe there's going to be any risk of safety issues, anything like that? You think we can do this procedurally?
Councilmember, I would say absolutely yes to that. Actually, I think by working with our Human Resources Department and clearing up all the historical issues with corrections officers, we're going to have a better sense of who we have in terms of personnel, be able to hire to the appropriate amount, which would then reduce overtime. So we think not only that it will add efficiencies, but will provide the same level or perhaps more in terms of safety.
And that's on the correction officer side.
Correct.
Can you speak to the sheriff's deputies as well? Is that?
Katie, do you want to speak to the savings on the sheriff's deputy side?
Sure. So the sheriff's deputies will, there could be some more focus on just shifting around personnel where we need it. And that's where we go on marking what's being used for. Another thing that had changed in the last union negotiations with one of the unions was that when they're doing medical transports, it no longer has to be 2 deputies. They can use a corrections officer. So this will be a first full year of that implementation. So we're hoping to see some savings on that end as well.
Understood. So you're going to be using a corrections officer and a deputy, saving partial salary on the transportation. Understood. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Thank you. Just a couple other thoughts as I was listening. I was wondering if, as it relates to any proposed changes to the homestead exemption, what's my question? Has the county done any type of analysis on how property tax changes at the state level would impact our county revenue?
We haven't, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Turner, we haven't really done any analysis on that. I mean, the homestead exemption is really governed by the state and what we get back. It's really under their control. It's been fairly stagnant for us. We get roughly $14 million for the levy, and we get a smaller piece to the general fund. But it's a very small component of our budget.
Okay, that's good. Do we have any updates about, and first of all, let me just thank the Treasurer's Office and all the fiscal offices that have been doing amazing outreach all across the county. I've had an opportunity to attend several of those events, the Great Estates programs, and all the work that we're doing to make sure that the public is aware of the Board of Tax Appeals process and you know, how they can, you know, launch a complaint or, you know, share whatever concerns they may have about their new valuations. So I'm saying that those programs have been a success, and I hope we continue to do that. Do we have any kind of assessment on the program? What is it called, y'all? The for eligible seniors to the $10,000 pilot program. Any preliminary thoughts, feedback?
So I'd have to get back to you, but none at this time. I know, I wish Mike Chambers was here. I know he had just checked with Brad on this program. I think there's been a little bit hold up on using our third-party vendor. So we're trying to let that keep moving along. As soon as we have something, we can bring it back to this committee.
Okay, that would be great. Any further questions? Okay. Well, thank all 3 of you. I thank you personally. Walter and Shantae have been amazing in trying to help me understand the decisions that you all have to make. And not everyone's going to be happy, but I think we're moving in a positive direction. We'll be interested to see what the actual plan is going to be.
Council Chair, if I may add my thanks to that, I really want to thank Katie, Walter, Mike, and the team who's done a lot of hard work over the first couple of months of 2025 to identify these options and opportunities to bring our budget into balance. As Chief Gallagher mentioned, we are meeting every other week now to discuss this, the 4 of us, on a regular basis, and we'll continue to do so, not just throughout the implementation of these adjustments, but throughout the rest of the year.
Madam Chair,
Councilman.
just a comment that the the executive and your team has consulted with us extensively during this process when you put out the memo to the departments. There wasn't a line of it that came as a surprise to me because I had been briefed in advance on all of it, and I know that that you've worked with Meredith as well and others, and so we appreciate your working with us, and I think you're on the right track.
Councilmember Miller, Council President Miller, thank you. And that's the spirit in which we will come back to you and talk to you about the budget in the future. Thank you. And thank you to the council for your acknowledgement in terms of general fund cuts. I know it's a modest amount from council, but we appreciate symbolically the effort that you are making as well to identify unspent dollars. So we need to all be in this together.
Exactly. So let's plan to have a, maybe a mid-year committee update so we can see where we are with these cuts and decisions. Big shout out to my budget finance translator, Trevor McAleer. Okay. If there's nothing else, is there any miscellaneous business? Gentlemen and Madame, thank you for